The rain came down in sheets across the parking lot of Ridgewood Elementary, turning the afternoon pickup line into a slow crawl of headlights and windshield wipers beating against the gray November sky. Jack Murphy sat in his 12-year-old pickup truck, the engine idling with that familiar rattle he kept meaning to fix but never quite found the money for, watching the school doors through the blur of water streaming down his windshield. His work boots were still caked with mud from the construction site, and his flannel shirt carried the smell of sawdust and honest labor, but he had made it here on time, just like he did every single day because some things mattered more than overtime pay. The clock on his dashboard read 3:42, and in exactly 3 minutes those doors would open, and his 2 reasons for breathing would come running out into the rain, backpacks bouncing, faces searching the line of cars for the familiar shape of his old Ford. He thought about the bills, sitting on his kitchen counter, the ones he had arranged in order of urgency this morning while the kids ate their cereal. Electric was due Friday. The truck payment could slide another week if he called and explained again that the check was coming. Sophie needed new shoes because she had grown 2 sizes in what felt like overnight, and Marcus had that field trip permission slip that required $40 he did not have but would find somehow, the way he always found a way. These were the calculations that ran through his mind during every quiet moment, the constant mathematics of survival that had become as natural as breathing since Ellen had passed 3 years ago, leaving him alone with a 7-year-old daughter and a 5-year-old son and a grief so heavy it had nearly crushed him flat. But he had not let it crush him. He had gotten up the next morning and made breakfast. He had gotten up the morning after that and done it again, and again, and again, until the getting up became its own kind of victory, until the simple acts of packing lunches and checking homework and reading bedtime stories became the architecture of a life rebuilt from ruins. Jack Murphy was not a hero. He was just a father who refused to let his children see him fall apart, even on the nights when falling apart felt like the only honest thing to do. The school doors opened and children began pouring out, a stream of raincoats and umbrellas, parents rushing forward with open arms. Jack spotted Sophie first, her dark hair pulled back in the ponytail he had learned to make after watching approximately 40 YouTube tutorials, her purple jacket bright against the gray afternoon. She was holding her brother's hand, guiding him through the chaos the way she always did, 10 years old and already carrying responsibilities no child should have to carry. Marcus walked beside her, 8 now and growing into his father's lanky frame, his backpack dragging on the wet ground because he never remembered to lift it no matter how many times Jack reminded him. Jack pushed open his door and stepped into the rain, raising his hand so they could see him. Sophie's face broke into a smile and she tugged Marcus forward, both of them running now, splashing through puddles without care. He crouched down and caught them both in his arms, feeling their small bodies press against him, smelling the school smell of chalk dust and cafeteria food that clung to their clothes. This was it, he thought. This was everything. Whatever else the world took from him, it could not take this moment, this feeling of his children safe in his arms at the end of another day. They piled into the truck, Marcus claiming the window seat with the authority of a younger sibling who had learned to stake his territory early. Sophie sat in the middle, close to her father, her hand resting on his arm as he pulled out of the parking lot and into the slow river of traffic heading toward town. The rain showed no signs of letting up, and the radio played something soft and staticky that none of them were really listening to. Marcus was telling a complicated story about something that had happened at recess involving a soccer ball and a teacher's coffee, and what sounded like an improbable chain of coincidences that had resulted in no one getting in trouble. Sophie was adding corrections and clarifications in her patient way, and Jack was making the appropriate sounds of surprise and amusement, his eyes on the road, his heart full of the ordinary miracle of his children's voices. He was thinking about dinner, calculating what he had in the refrigerator that could become a meal when he saw the smoke. It rose from somewhere beyond the next hill, a thick black column climbing into the gray sky like a warning. Jack's hands tightened on the steering wheel. The road they were on curved around toward the old bridge that crossed Miller Creek, and as they crested the hill, the source of the smoke became terribly clear. A school bus lay on its side in the ditch beside the road, its yellow paint stark against the brown grass, flames licking from the crumpled hood where it had apparently collided with a delivery truck that now sat jackknifed across both lanes. The bus was the small kind, the kind used for special trips and after-school programs, and even from here Jack could see movement inside, small hands pressing against the windows, small faces frozen in terror. The traffic ahead had stopped, cars pulling over, people getting out and standing in the rain and staring, but no one was moving toward the bus. No one was doing anything except watching. Jack pulled his truck onto the shoulder and threw it into park. His mind was empty of everything except the image of those hands against the glass. Somewhere in the back of his thoughts, he registered that this was dangerous, that there was fire and gasoline and 100 ways this could go wrong, but those thoughts were distant and irrelevant, drowned out by something deeper, something that had been forged in him long before he became a father, back when he was 18 years old and wearing a uniform and learning that some moments do not allow for hesitation. He turned to his children. Sophie's face had gone pale, her eyes fixed on the burning bus. Marcus was gripping his sister's hand, his mouth open, no sound coming out. Jack took Sophie's face in his hands and looked into her eyes. "Listen to me," he said, his voice calm and steady in a way that surprised him. "I need you to stay in the truck. Lock the doors. Do not get out for any reason. Do you understand me?" Sophie nodded, her eyes wide but trusting. She had seen her father like this before, in the moments when something needed to be done and there was no one else to do it. She reached over and put her arm around Marcus, pulling him close. Jack stepped out into the rain and ran. The heat hit him first, a wall of it radiating from the crumpled hood of the bus. He could hear screaming now, high and thin, the sound of children in panic. The delivery truck driver was stumbling around the front of his vehicle, blood running from a cut on his forehead, dazed but apparently uninjured enough to stand. Jack grabbed him by the shoulders. "How many kids on the bus?" he demanded. The driver blinked at him, uncomprehending. Jack shook him. "The bus. How many children?" The driver's mouth worked for a moment before words came out. "6, he said. "Maybe 7. Field trip." They were going to the nature center. Jack released him and moved toward the bus. The emergency exit at the back was crumpled shut, the metal twisted from the impact. The front door was pressed against the muddy ground where the bus had come to rest on its side. That left the roof hatch and the windows. He climbed up onto the exposed undercarriage of the bus, feeling the heat intensify as he moved closer to the flames. The roof hatch was there, a square panel designed for exactly this kind of emergency. He grabbed the handle and pulled, but it stuck. The mechanism jammed or rusted or both. He pulled again, harder, feeling something in his shoulder strain. Still nothing. Inside the bus, the screaming continued. He could see them now through the rear window, small bodies piled together where they had tumbled when the bus rolled. An adult was there too, a woman in a blue sweater trying to calm them while blood ran down her face from somewhere above her hairline. She saw Jack and her eyes went wide with desperate hope. Jack looked around for something, anything. His eyes landed on a piece of metal debris from the collision, a jagged strip torn from the delivery truck. He grabbed it and wedged it under the edge of the roof hatch, using it as a lever. He put everything he had into it, all the strength built up from years of hauling lumber and digging foundations and carrying his sleeping children up the stairs to bed. The hatch groaned. He pushed harder, and then it gave way, flying open with a screech of protesting metal. Smoke poured up through the opening, thick and black and choking. Jack pulled off his flannel shirt and wrapped it around his face, then lowered himself through the hatch into the bus. The heat was intense now, and he could see the flames creeping closer, eating their way through the dashboard toward the seats. The children were huddled at the back as far from the fire as they could get. 6 of them, he counted, 5 kids and the woman, all of them looking at him with the same expression, the same desperate belief that he could save them. "One at a time," he said, his voice muffled through the shirt. "I'm going to lift you up through that hatch. Do not panic. Do not push. We're all getting out of here." He started with the smallest, a little girl who could not have been more than 4, her face streaked with tears and soot. He lifted her up through the hatch and handed her to someone above, one of the bystanders who had finally found the courage to approach. Then the next child, and the next. He worked quickly but carefully, acutely aware of the flames advancing behind him, the smoke thickening with every breath. The woman helped, passing the children to him despite her own injuries, her hands shaking but her voice steady as she murmured reassurances to each one. 4 children out, then 5. The 6th was a boy, older than the others, maybe 10 or 11, his leg bent at an angle that told Jack it was broken. The boy was trying to be brave, trying not to cry, but his face was gray with pain. Jack crouched down beside him. "I know it hurts," he said, "but I need you to hold on to me, okay? Can you do that?" The boy nodded, his jaw set. Jack lifted him as gently as he could, feeling the boy's arms wrap around his neck, hearing the sharp intake of breath as the movement jostled his injured leg. He raised the boy up through the hatch into the waiting hands of the people above. Now the woman, she was unsteady on her feet, the blood still flowing from her head wound, but she moved toward him with determination. He helped her up, bracing her weight as she climbed through the opening, feeling the floor of the bus grow hot beneath his feet. The flames were close now, close enough that he could feel his skin prickling, close enough that staying another moment was gambling with his life. He reached up and grabbed the edges of the hatch, pulling himself through in one motion. The rain hit his face like a blessing, cool and clean, washing the smoke from his eyes. Hands grabbed him and pulled him down from the bus, and he stumbled forward, away from the heat, his lungs burning with every breath. Behind him he heard the whoosh of the flames finally reaching the fuel tank, felt the concussion of the explosion push against his back. But he was clear. They were all clear. He fell to his knees in the wet grass beside the road, coughing, his body shaking with adrenaline and exhaustion. Someone was pressing a water bottle into his hands. Someone else was saying something about an ambulance, about how everyone was going to be okay. Jack looked up and saw the children he had pulled from the bus, huddled together under the shelter of a stranger's umbrella, alive and whole. And then he heard Sophie's voice calling for him, and he turned to see his daughter running toward him through the rain, Marcus right behind her, their faces wild with fear and relief. He opened his arms and they crashed into him, nearly knocking him over, and he held them against his chest and felt the world narrow down to this single point, this single truth. His children were safe. Everyone was safe. For this one moment, against all odds, everyone was safe. The first black SUV appeared outside his worksite the next day around noon. Jack was on a ladder nailing shingles to a roof in a new subdivision when his foreman called up that he had visitors. He climbed down to find 2 men in suits standing by a vehicle so polished it seemed to glow in the midday sun. They were the kind of men who wore suits like uniforms, straight-backed and serious, with a particular alertness of people who had spent their lives in service of something larger than themselves. "Mr. Murphy," the taller one said, "we'd like a word with you if you have a moment." Jack wiped his hands on his jeans and studied them. Military, he guessed, or former military, which in some ways was the same thing. Something about the way they held themselves, the economy of their movements. He had known men like this, had been a man like this, in another lifetime. "What's this about?" he asked. The taller man glanced at his partner, then back at Jack. "We represent someone who is very interested in what happened yesterday. Someone who would like to meet you and express their gratitude in person." He paused. The bus that crashed was carrying children from the Pine Ridge Academy. One of those children was the granddaughter of Admiral Catherine Hayes. The name landed like a stone in still water. Jack knew it, of course. Everyone who had ever served knew that name. Admiral Catherine Hayes, retired, former head of Naval Special Warfare Command. One of the most decorated officers in modern military history. A legend in the truest sense of the word. The Admiral would like to invite you to dinner, the man continued. Tonight, if possible. She understands you're a busy man, but she was quite insistent. Jack thought about the bills on his counter, the shoes Sophie needed, the $40 for Marcus's field trip. He thought about his aching muscles and his smoke-damaged lungs and the work he had scheduled for the rest of the week. And then he thought about saying no to Admiral Catherine Hayes. "Let me make some calls," he said. "I'll need to find someone to watch my kids." The men exchanged a glance. The Admiral anticipated that might be a concern, the shorter one said. "She's arranged for a certified childcare professional to stay with your children this evening, fully vetted and background checked. She's also arranged for a car to pick you up at 6. Jack felt something shift in his chest, a mixture of discomfort and curiosity. He was not used to people arranging things for him, anticipating his needs, smoothing the path. His life was an endless series of obstacles he navigated alone, but he recognized the gesture for what it was, not charity, but respect. 6 o'clock, he said. "I'll be ready." The house where the car delivered him that evening was not what he expected. He had imagined something grand, a mansion with gates and guards. Instead, the car pulled up to a modest farmhouse on the outskirts of town, white clapboard and green shutters, a porch with rocking chairs and a garden that had been put to bed for winter. It looked like a place where regular people lived regular lives, but the woman who opened the front door was anything but regular. Admiral Catherine Hayes was tall and straight-backed despite her 72 years, her silver hair cut short in a style that was practical rather than fashionable. She wore dark slacks and a simple cream-colored sweater, and her eyes, when they met Jack's, held an intensity that he recognized from his own years of service. This was a woman who had sent men into danger and made decisions that cost lives and saved them. This was a woman who understood exactly what he had done yesterday and why it mattered. "Mr. Murphy," she said, extending her hand, "thank you for coming." Her grip was firm, her palm calloused in ways that surprised him. She led him inside, through a hallway lined with photographs that told the story of a life of service, a young woman in uniform rising through the ranks, a mother with 2 children, a leader shaking hands with presidents and generals. Jack studied them as he passed, trying to reconcile the woman in these images with the grandmother who was now leading him toward a kitchen that smelled of roasting chicken. "I hope you don't mind," she said. "I prefer to cook myself. There's something about sharing a meal you've prepared with your own hands. It means more, somehow." Jack understood exactly what she meant. He thought of the countless meals he had made for Sophie and Marcus, the way the simple act of feeding them had become a form of love made tangible. "I feel the same way," he said. The Admiral smiled. "My granddaughter," she said, "Lily, she's the one you pulled from that bus yesterday. She's been talking about you nonstop. She drew me a picture of you this morning." She led him to the refrigerator where a child's drawing was held in place by a magnet shaped like an anchor. It showed a stick figure with brown hair climbing out of a yellow rectangle surrounded by orange crayon flames. Above the figure, in wobbly letters, "The Brave Man." Jack stared at the picture for a long moment, something tightening in his chest. He thought about his own children's drawings, the ones that covered his refrigerator at home. This was not so different. This was a child's attempt to make sense of something frightening, to transform trauma into something she could understand. "She's a brave kid herself," he said finally. They all were. Staying calm like that, helping each other. "I just did the heavy lifting." The Admiral was watching him with an expression he could not quite read. "Humility," she said. "That's rarer than you might think, Mr. Murphy, especially in the face of genuine heroism." They ate roast chicken with root vegetables and talked. She asked about his children, his work, his life in Ridgewood. He found himself talking more than he usually did, drawn out by her genuine curiosity. She had raised 2 children while climbing the ranks of a military that had not always welcomed women in leadership. She knew something about doing the impossible while the world watched and judged. It was only after the dishes had been cleared that she came to the point. "I've been watching you, Mr. Murphy," she said. Not. Just since yesterday. For several months now. Jack set down his coffee cup carefully. I'm not sure what you mean. I run a foundation, she said. Officially, it supports military families, provides scholarships, helps veterans. All true, but there's another aspect less public. We identify individuals with certain qualities: courage, competence, character, people suited for work that requires those qualities in abundance. What kind of work? Jack asked. The kind I used to oversee, she said. The kind that happens in the shadows, that protects people who will never know they were in danger. She paused. I've reviewed your service record, Mr. Murphy. I know about your time with the teams. I know about Kandahar and what you did there and why you left the service afterward. Jack felt the blood drain from his face. That record is classified. Nobody should be able to access it. Nobody ordinary, the Admiral agreed. But I am not ordinary, Mr. Murphy, and neither are you. I'm not that person anymore, he said. I'm a father now. I build houses. That's my life. The Admiral nodded slowly. I understand. But what you did yesterday wasn't the action of someone who has left that part of himself behind. That was instinct, training, reflex. The man who climbed into that burning bus is the same man who walked into that compound in Kandahar. Why are you telling me this? Because I have a proposition, not a return to active service. But we've been tracking a network that traffics in something more valuable than drugs or weapons. They traffic in children, Mr. Murphy. They find them, take them, sell them to the highest bidder. We've identified key players, mapped their operations, but we need someone with specific skills to get close enough to bring it down. Jack stared at her. You want me to go undercover? I have 2 kids at home. I can't disappear into some black ops mission. Nothing so dramatic. The network operates locally, right here in this region. They use legitimate businesses as fronts. We need someone who can move in those circles without arousing suspicion. Someone who looks like a regular person because he is one. A construction worker who happens to have the training to handle whatever he might find. And my children? What happens to them? They would be protected. The best protection available, the kind that comes from resources you cannot imagine. She leaned forward. I know what I'm asking, but I also know who you are. You cannot walk away when children are in danger. It's not in your nature. And there are children in danger right now, right here in your community. Jack sat very still, feeling the weight of her words settle over him. He thought about Sophie and Marcus, safe at home. He thought about Lily's drawing on the refrigerator. He thought about the children on that bus, their hands pressed against the glass. He thought about walking away, going back to his life, his bills, his quiet survival. And he knew, even as he thought it, that she was right. He could not walk away. He never could. Tell me everything, he said, and then let me make my decision. The network called itself the Foundation. They operated through legitimate businesses, childcare centers, and after-school programs and transportation companies, using their access to identify vulnerable children and funnel them into the pipeline. The children disappeared gradually, first from their parents' lives and then from existence entirely, shipped to buyers overseas. The local hub was Riverside Educational Services. They provided tutoring and enrichment programs to schools throughout the region, including Pine Ridge Academy. The bus accident had been exactly that, an accident, but it had created an opportunity. The delivery truck driver Victor Case was a key logistics coordinator for the Foundation, currently recovering from injuries. When he was released, he would need work, and Riverside would need someone to fill the gap. That someone would be Jack Murphy. His first weeks passed uneventfully. He learned the routes, memorized the faces of the children in his care, fell into the rhythm of the work. The other drivers were friendly enough, ordinary people doing ordinary jobs, and Jack found himself wondering if any of them knew what the company really was. Victor Case returned on Jack's 3rd Monday. He was a thin man with nervous eyes and a habit of looking over his shoulder. Jack understood immediately that Case was not a true believer. He was a tool, a frightened functionary who had gotten in too deep and saw no way out. Jack engineered a friendship slowly and carefully. He offered Case coffee during breaks, listened sympathetically when Case complained about his injuries, his bills, his wife who did not understand. Over the weeks that followed, he earned Case's trust, becoming the colleague Case could confide in. It was Case who eventually led him to the evidence the Admiral needed. Late one night, after too many beers at a bar near the depot, KZ let slip that he was being asked to do a special run, a pickup not on any official schedule. Kids going to a special program, Case said bitterly, but I know where they really go. I know what happens to them. And I can't do anything about it because if I try to stop it, they'll kill me and my family. When? Jack asked. Saturday, 2 in the morning. A warehouse outside town where the old mill used to be. That's where the transfer happens. Jack nodded and bought Case another beer and drove him home and then sat in his truck in the darkness, thinking. This was it. The evidence they needed. If he could document the transfer, the Admiral's contacts could shut the whole operation down. But it was also more dangerous than anything he had done since Kandahar. The warehouse would be guarded. The people involved would not hesitate to kill him. And if something went wrong, his children would be orphans. He called the Admiral and told her what he had learned. She asked what he wanted to do. I want to be there, Jack said. I want to see it through. I was hoping you would say that. I'll have a team ready to move on your signal. Saturday night came cold and clear. Jack arranged for Sophie and Marcus to stay with a neighbor, then parked his truck a mile from the old mill and approached on foot. The warehouse was lit from within. He found a position behind rusted machinery with a clear view of the loading dock. The van doors opened. Children were let out into the cold night air, 6 of them, faces blank with fear held too long. Men handled them with casual efficiency, products being moved to market. Well-dressed strangers emerged from the warehouse, examining the children with cold assessment. Money changed hands. One child tried to run and was struck and carried inside. Jack documented everything, and then a guard's eyes swept the darkness, and Jack knew he had been seen. He sent the signal and ran. Pursuit crashed through the underbrush behind him. Within minutes they had cut off his route. 3 men with guns faced him. One stepped forward, silver-haired and calm. Mr. Murphy, we've been expecting you. Did you think the Admiral's operation was a secret? We knew you were coming before you did. The distant sound of helicopters gave Jack his opening. The men's attention shifted for a fraction of a second. Jack moved, closing the distance, disarming the first man, using him as a shield against the second, taking down the third. Then the helicopters were overhead, spotlights illuminating the warehouse, tactical teams rappelling down. The Foundation's men scattered, and Jack walked through the chaos toward the warehouse. He found the children huddled in a back room. You're safe now, he said, kneeling beside them. I'm going to take you home. The Admiral found him watching the children being loaded into ambulances. She placed a hand on his shoulder. You did well, she said. Because of you, these children will go home. Because of you, a network that operated for years has been destroyed. Is it over? This chapter is. But there are always more. There are always more children who need protecting. The question is whether you want to keep walking this path. Jack thought about his children, about the man he had been, the man he had become. He thought about the weight of the responsibility he had accepted. My kids come first, he said finally. Always. But when I can help, when there are children in danger and I have the power to protect them, I will. That's who I am. The Admiral smiled. That's all I ask. Go home, Mr. Murphy. Be with your children. When you're needed again, I'll be in touch. Jack drove home as the sun rose over Ridgewood. He picked up Sophie and Marcus and took them to breakfast at the diner on Main Street, where they ate pancakes and laughed and talked about nothing important at all. Later, watching them play in the backyard, Jack stood at the kitchen window. The bills were still on the counter, but there was money coming now. Sophie would get her new shoes. Marcus would go on his field trip, but he would also carry the knowledge of who he truly was, the skills that lay dormant beneath the surface. He was a father, a construction worker, a man who made breakfast and checked homework and read bedtime stories. But he was also something more, something forged in fire and tested in darkness, something that would rise to meet whatever challenges the future held. The phone rang, and Jack knew before he answered that it was the Admiral. She told him about the aftermath, the arrests, the children reunited with families, and then she told him about the next situation, another thread in the endless tapestry of evil that preyed on the innocent. There was no question of refusing. There was only the calculation of how to help while still being present for his children, how to walk in two worlds without losing himself in either. Outside, Sophie and Marcus had stopped their game and were looking at him through the window, their faces bright with simple joy. Jack smiled at them and raised his hand, and they waved back before returning to their play. He would protect them. He would protect all the children who could not protect themselves. And he would do it without fanfare or recognition, because that was what it meant to be a father, to be a protector, to be the kind of person who ran toward danger while others ran away. The sun continued to rise over Ridgewood, and Jack Murphy stood in his kitchen, watching his children play, carrying the weight of his purpose like a gift rather than a burden. He had been given a second chance at service, an opportunity to make his skills matter in a world that desperately needed people willing to stand against the darkness. He would not waste it. He